Ross Falacaro was discharged from the military in July of 2004 after serving for 4 years in Afghanistan. At the ripe young age of 26, he had not much family to return to, no higher education, and was officially diagnosed with PTSD.
I tried to make it on my own, on the outside. I really didn't have the tools to make it on my own. So, I drank and I drank and I drank, and I did what I thought was right. I became a bartender, and my life was slowly but surely deteriorating, and I didn't realize why.
Falacaro became homeless, like many other veterans from Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom, the official names for U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq, respectively. For Falacaro and his cohort, transitioning into civilian life, already notoriously difficult, is complicated by a number of factors, including a bad economy, high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder among veterans, and the misunderstandings of the American public. As it stands, the Department of Veterans Affairs reports that more than 10,000 of OIF and OEF veterans are either homeless or in programs designed to alleviate homelessness. So what exactly is causing these veterans to become homeless? One huge problem is the difficulty of finding jobs. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, overall, the U.S. unemployment rate is hovering around 9%. Then, there are challenges facing veterans specifically. Sherry Balter is an independent psychologist who works with Stand Down House, a transitional living facility in Lake Worth, Florida, to treat veterans with mental health and addiction issues.
A lot of our veterans, like many in our nation, are dealing with unemployment. And when you're dealing with our returning OIF, OEF veterans, their unemployment rate is drastically higher than civilian counterparts of the same age group. They have more difficulty finding employment, especially again our returning veterans, since the skills that they learn in service and on the battlefield are not easily translated into civilian occupations.
In addition to difficulty finding a market for military skills, veterans often encounter misunderstandings from potential employers, specifically regarding post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, which is a mental health disorder that can follow traumatic experiences. Until treated, symptoms can include flashbacks, nightmares, phobias, and a heightened startle response.
There's also still some lingering from the years before my time either, I think, a fear of veterans, especially combat veterans, the ongoing postal image, that some employers may be afraid of hiring, especially those that have ended up involved in the legal system due to their military and combat experiences. And people often see a felony or an addiction, and the employers aren't really looking any further.
Then, there are restrictions to the type of work available to veterans due to injuries sustained in combat.
Plus, of course, any that suffered amputations and worse, traumatic brain injury, they can't compete for the same jobs. They're not able to do the same jobs that they would have been able to prior to their injury. And especially traumatic brain injury, because looking at the person, if there wasn't a significant head trauma with it, no one would know. They'll just see these personality changes, these odd affect from the person. Pain issues can impair their ability to take care of themselves, to hold employment.
The war's effects on mental health can also inhibit veterans' ability to work and impact their general quality of life.
Dealing with mental health issues, be it leading to addiction, flashbacks, or other issues, can hinder employment and therefore financial stability, relationships. And as relationships will wither and have problems, many of these individuals end up on the streets rather than with spouses or families.
Even for a veteran with a clean medical record after the war, returning to civilian life can be difficult. For Falacaro, the inability to deal with trauma issues and the stress of coming home led to substance abuse and away from a healthy and productive lifestyle.
And I never dealt with the issues of what I experienced traumatically in the Middle East. I never dealt with my issues of transitioning from a person in the military back to civilian life. So the transition process for me was covered up with the substance, and that substance was alcohol.
On the whole, however, veterans are only slightly more likely to be homeless than the general population. According to the 2009 Annual Homeless Assessment Report conducted by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, former service members make up 10% of the overall U.S. population, but 12% of the homeless population. John Kuhn is Acting National Director for the VA Supported Services for Veteran Families program. He notes that certain populations within former service members are overrepresented among the homeless.
Within that population, there are important subsets where risk is quite a bit higher. And those subsets include veterans who are in poverty, female veterans, younger veterans, and minorities.
The reasons why these groups are susceptible aren't entirely known, though Balter points out that those at-risk younger veterans often had to grow up on the battlefield.
They're first learning who they are, their identity, figuring out kind of what they want to be when they grow up, their morals, their beliefs and values. That's natural for late teen, early 20s, and that gets disrupted. They also often find at any age a sense of satisfaction and purpose that when they then come out of service, they feel is lacking. They don't know what their purpose is anymore.
For women, the stigma against seeking help for mental health problems, already well established among troops with tough, independent self-images, is particularly strong, says Dr. Balter.
For our female veterans, who often feel the additional difficulty of surviving in a traditionally male environment and not wanting to be seen as weak if they admit to these mental health difficulties or coping difficulties.
According to the annual Homeless Assessment Report, most homeless veterans are between 31 and 61 years old, in keeping with the fact that the vast majority of America's veterans come from older wars. However, Kuhn says that if Iraq and Afghanistan follow the pattern established in the Vietnam era, homelessness may not show up immediately.
Early after the conflict, you didn't see lots of veterans becoming homeless right away. And homelessness is a condition that develops over time. Our veterans coming out of these war zones will have other supports initially. So by the time they work through all those things, they can slip into homelessness, and that can take years.
Balter, however, has noticed that the process by which veterans become homeless seems to be expedited this time around.
And that's actually one difference, is our returning service members are becoming homeless much faster than our veterans of previous wars. For example, after Vietnam, it took an average of 10 years for a Vietnam vet to end up homeless, and an average OAF veteran is often homeless within 18 months after coming back.
One big difference between these wars and previous wars is that they're being fought without a draft. Reserve troops, for example, were called into duty, which means that they don't have access to the same social support network as active troops, says Balter.
They're not located near bases. Actually, they're not hooked into family readiness groups. A lot of these individuals were kind of living their lives and doing their guard or reserve duty. Now they're kind of pulled out of any of their civilian life, not knowing if their jobs are going to be kept for them.
In addition, according to Kuhn, the types of new recruits changed over the course of the war.
Early in the war, the volunteer army was highly educated. Also, right after 9/11, I think there was a much greater interest in serving the country. We had the veterans who were involved might have been different than the group later on, where we still had excellent caliber of troops, but of course at that point the military was desperate to fill some of the roles of their troops, and recruiting was more of a challenge.
Overall, Falcaro's analysis is that he is just among the first of a growing group of veterans.
I have a feeling there's going to be a much larger population for the years to come. Because I know what I went through, I know what friends of mine went through, and I know that there's people from my era that haven't dealt with these issues yet that I've been dealing with. They just haven't faced them yet. So
this leaves a challenge for the Department of Veterans Affairs and community groups to try and get veterans off the streets, or better yet, address the issues before they lead to homelessness. Next time, I will analyze and explore the effectiveness of the VA. For War News Radio, I'm Amandine Lee.